Well, hello and welcome back, and I'm going to come right out with it. This vlog is going to be really boring. A really boring subject. Boring but necessary. Yep, backups and archives. So, how I do my backup and archive can be completely different from someone else, each to their own. And am I 100% covered? Well, I'd like to think yes, in a way. Could I do it better? Probably. But this is really just my own thoughts on how I back up and archive, specifically my photographs. And I like to think of my backup archive strategy as almost a 3-stage approach. Sort of an instantaneous backup, something that I can reach into and grab should I lose something, on the day. I then like to think of something that I keep a long-term archive of with multiple copies of it. And then, given the fact that we now live in the era of cloud, I like to think that I have something sort of overlaying on top of all of that there to provide just that extra little bit of peace of mind when it comes to security of my photographic library. Let's jump over to the screens and try to stay awake. Okay, so my first line of defense in my backup stroke archive strategy is Time Machine. And anyone who runs on a Macintosh, I'm sure, is very familiar with Time Machine that comes bundled with Macintosh. And I will clearly distinguish later between the term backup and archive. Now, as you can see, I have a 3 terabyte external USB drive. My Macintosh itself has got a 1 terabyte internal drive, and I just back up the whole drive. I'm kind of being a little bit generous by calling it a strategy. The lack of USB ports on a MacBook Pro, at least on my 2013 model, means that I would love to say that I have this plugged in every time I switch on my MacBook, but that is very rarely the case. I am trying to get better at it because, of course, having that first line of backup is only as good as often as you do the backup. So what I'm trying to get into the habit of doing before I switch down for the day, I plug in the external drive and do a backup. Now, because of the way Lightroom stores its files, at least how I store the files within Lightroom, they are just flat files on the hard drive. So of course this is backing up individual files, so it's relatively straightforward to grab one of those back. The downside to using Time Machine, and please correct me if I'm wrong here or if there is an alternative, I also have probably about 70 or 80 gigabytes of data in my photos library. Now, that is 99% iPhone images, but of course I still have a lot of iPhone images that I want to work on, that I want to use, and obviously that I want to just keep from a historic point of view. Now, from what I can tell, this is doing a backup of the photos library, but if I wanted to retrieve one particular image, I believe I would need to restore the whole photos library. Correct me if I'm wrong there. Maybe I'm doing it a disservice, but that would be one downside to using something like Time Machine if you were using your photos library rather than just Lightroom. Now, what I normally do is if I have got an image that I've taken on the phone and I really like it, and it's something that I want to make sure that I've got a good backup of, using the Lightroom mobile app, I will quite often copy it into a sync folder on my Lightroom mobile app, and then when I'm online, that will sync via the cloud to my desktop, and then I will copy that into my 2020 or whatever year I'm in folder within Lightroom, and that means that that image, as well as existing within the Photos app, it also exists within Lightroom. So that's my first line backup, and you can see right now doing a current backup. And so what I'm going to try to do is every day before I switch down, plug in the drive, and let it do a backup. So that's Time Machine. Okay, so stage one of my archive strategy is getting the photos that are ready to be put onto those external drives, putting them onto the first drive. And how I do that is through smart collections within Lightroom. So I've plugged in one of the drives at the moment, and you can see that that is called Lightroom 1. And if I open that up, you see that we've got a bunch of complete images in here. A number of you will probably say that's quite a small collection. I know there's people who maybe will have several thousand images per year, and there's a couple of reasons behind that. Firstly, for a number of years, as you know, I did a lot of sports photography. I also did some wedding photography as well, and so there were reasonable gaps for a couple of years in terms of the number of images that I was producing. I was actually doing mostly sports work, which is why back in certainly before 2014, there's not a huge amount of images. Secondly, I am reasonably sort of harsh when it comes to culling. Now, one of the mistakes that I probably did make in the past was being too quick to cull images that I was using to maybe composite in a high dynamic range image. And the reason why I say that is because software has, of course, developed quite considerably over the last number of years, especially in regards to blending images. And so it would be interesting to test some of the files that I would have combined several years ago with perhaps something like Raya Pro or even the HDR function within Lightroom. So lesson learned, Nigel. Don't be so quick to maybe delete some of those HDR baseline images. But I'm reasonably harsh. I don't take a huge amount of images as well when I'm out. I'd rather sort of take my time and explore. Anyway, so this is the folder structure. Nothing too dramatic there, just the years. So if I come down to the Smart Collections and open this up and go into my workflow, and then we look at the to archive. So anything that is ready to archive, I color code green. And what I try to do is, again, probably do this archiving maybe a couple of times per month, just so I'm not having to copy over a huge amount of images. Now, before I copy those images across, there's a couple of things that I want to make sure that I've done. Firstly, I want to make sure that every single one of these images has a smart preview. Basically, that means that even though I'm going to get rid of the file, the physical file, I'm still able to do full edits with it, and it means that when I sync back up with them, when I plug the Lightroom external hard drive back in again, those changes will be applied to the actual physical raw file. Now, 96% of the images in my library should have a smart preview, because part of the input process, the input kind of script, it will build a smart preview. But if there's any files that I have brought in via, for example, Lightroom Mobile, or from time to time I will edit a JPEG from within Lightroom in Photoshop, and for some reason I don't quite understand, rather than it saving it directly back into my Lightroom catalog, it saves it just out to the drive itself, and so I then have to re-import it. And if I'm doing it that way, especially when I'm doing the Lightroom Mobile move, you'll see that there's no smart preview attached to this. So I'll select all of the images, all of the green images. I'll go up to Library, Previews, and Build Smart Previews. And it will go ahead and make sure that there's a smart preview for those files. The reason for that is, obviously, if I were to copy these files away to the external drive, then I wouldn't be able to do much with that file. It would leave a kind of a thumbnail stub, but I wouldn't be able to do a lot with it. The next thing that I'll do, and this is one of the reasons why I try to do this as sort of a couple of times a month, and so I'm not having to do this too often. Again, this won't really apply to 95% of my images, because as part of the input process, I will always give at least one keyword, and I want a keyword in here. Even just one keyword, so you can see that a bunch of these simply have Portrush. I could probably also have them as ICM. The reason why I probably don't have them as ICM here is because they were imported as part of a set of images, and some of them weren't ICM, but they were all shot in Portrush. Now the reason why I want at least one keyword in the file is because if I was to copy these files to an external drive and they didn't have a keyword associated with them, then they would disappear. They wouldn't disappear from my offline library, but they would disappear from my smart collections library, and so I would almost lose complete sight of that I had them. Now through time I then go through the smart collections and maybe add additional keywords that maybe populate them through different folders. So I just make sure that every single one of these images will have at least one keyword associated with it. So with that all in place, Smart Preview's built, all of the files have got keywords. I then select them all, come up to folders, Lightroom, this is the external drive, and I'm just going to copy these across to complete 2020. Okay, so that's all of those files now copied across. So if I now just extract, so let's come back out of this and go into my 2020 folder, and just off screen I'm just going to eject the Lightroom 1 external drive, so that has now been ejected. So if I now come down to my collections again and go to archive, you can see that they still exist, but now the main difference is there's only a Smart Preview. It can no longer find, at the moment it can no longer find the original file. Again, off camera, if I plug back in again the external hard drive, once it picks up, you should see that the original file will be found again. And there you go, original plus Smart Preview. And then the last thing that I will do is, just so I don't get confused, which is easily done, let's face it, I will select all of those images, I will right mouse click, I will set color label to none, and that basically clears out the to archive Smart collection. So those files are now no longer on my hard drive on my Mac, they're on my hard drive on my on the external hard drive. So at the moment they exist in two places that I've spoken about. They exist in my Time Machine backup, and they exist on the external hard drive. So now what we want to do is copy those files across to a second external hard drive, and we'll cover that now. So there's one other very important file that I want to make sure I'm copying across to my external hard drives, and that's the Lightroom catalog file. So the most important file within Lightroom. All of the edits that I'm making are stored within that catalog file, and so it's very important that you also have a backup and an archive of that. Now obviously it has been backed up via Time Machine, but I also want to make sure that I have a copy of it periodically onto my archive. So let's go ahead and quit Lightroom, and I've got it set up to back up the catalog once a day when exiting. So I'm just going to go ahead and back up the catalog. Okay, so that's the catalog backed up and Lightroom has exited. So if I now go in to my pictures directory and go into Lightroom, you'll see that the Lightroom data, the Lightroom catalog, is today at 1551. But also if I go into backups, you see that it has actually made a backup of the Lightroom catalog. Now you can see that there's a whole bunch of them here. This is a game where you've got to be careful when you're doing a Lightroom backup. If you're doing the backup to the same hard drive, i.e. the same MacBook Pro hard drive for example, it's a little bit of a false safety net, because of course if your Mac dies, then your Lightroom catalog has gone and so has your backup. So what I like to do, I'm just going to open up this is my Lightroom 1 archive external drive, and you see that I have a Lightroom catalogs file, and I have a backup folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the one that was backed up today, and I'm just going to drag it across to that folder and make a copy of it. So there's now a copy of it on this external drive that I'm going to duplicate to another external drive as well. So that just gives me that extra level of confidence that I've not only copied my photos across, but I've also copied the Lightroom catalog file with all of the changes. Okay, so let's now do the synchronization between my two external hard drives. And for that, I'm using a program called SuperDuper. I think it's Macintosh only, not too sure. And it was a purchase, but I think you get lifetime upgrades with it. So basically what this is going to do, it's going to analyze the files on both Lightroom 1 and Lightroom 2, which are my two external hard drives, and then it will copy only the updated files on Lightroom 1 across to Lightroom 2. No file will be overwritten, no files will be deleted. So if I just come down here, this is my Lightroom 1. Now you'll notice that on Lightroom 2, slightly different folder structure. This is also used for other backups that are outside of the synchronization. The most important folder for me here is Lightroom and Lightroom here, because this is a synchronization of all of those archive files that I've actually copied between or copied off from my main Lightroom catalog. So you can see that the folder structure here is linked up. Now if I come back out and come back out again, and just as an example to show you, if I go into LRCats and into the backup folder, you can see that there's two folders actually listed here. But if I go into LRCats on Lightroom 2 and backups, you can see that there's only the one folder. So hopefully we'll be able to come back in after this synchronization has taken place to show you that copy across. I'm not sure how many other files need to be copied across. So with Lightroom 1 to Lightroom 2, you simply, let's just skip that upgrade. Let's just hit a copy now. It'll ask for my password. It's again, so it's going to give you, you're going to copy your files from Lightroom 1 to Lightroom 2. I go ahead and do the copy. Now, irrespective of how many files you have to copy across, it actually will still take a little bit of time because it has to do an analysis of how many files are actually on the file. And you can see there's over 300,000 files to be analyzed. So even though there's not going to be a huge amount of data to be copied, this still will take a little bit of time. And obviously it will take, depending on how long how many files you have and how much needs to be copied, it could take anywhere between 10 minutes and maybe even up to an hour. So we shall catch up once this has finished. Okay, so that is the analysis done, and as you can see, because I only had 2 files to copy across, it only took 3 minutes to actually do the copy, so nice and quick in this example. So now if I go into Lightroom 2 and go into my LRCats and backups, you can now see that the new folder exists, which is my Lightroom catalog backup that I copied across. So super duper, a really super duper way to do a synchronization between 2 hard drives. And then, as I said, on normal circumstances, this second Lightroom hard drive will normally remain off-site, just not possible right now because of social distancing, but this Lightroom 2 folder will stay off-site. Now, one of the reasons why I'm not overly concerned at the moment with having both of my external archive drives in the same physical location is because I actually use another level of protection as well. And hopefully, if you are already paying for this service, you are making use of it. And that's Amazon Photos. So this actually comes included with your Amazon Prime membership. And basically what it is, it's unlimited cloud storage for your photos and up to 5 gigabytes of storage for video. Having spoken to a number of other photographers over the last couple of months, it would seem that a lot of folks aren't aware that this is actually available. So I've got it set up at the moment. Now if I just pause all backups at the moment, I've got it set up at the moment just backing up my Lightroom active folder. And in there is obviously all of the various folders, including obviously 2020. So at the moment, here at home, because we spend most of our time on the road, we actually don't have home broadband. So at the moment, I'm on my 4G connection now, so I don't really want to use too much of the data usage on the backup, which is why I've hit pause. But it's pretty self-explanatory. It will actually back up JPEGs and RAW files, to the cloud, and it's not free because of course you're paying for Amazon Prime, but it's included in your Amazon Prime membership. So why wouldn't you? And the really cool thing about it is, if I go to home and I go to the photos backed up and drag this in, so you can actually see all of the photographs that you've actually backed up, and it's just fantastic. And so if you wanted to go and restore, you could restore from here, or of course you can actually restore from the actual app itself. Now, just a little tip, what I quite often do, now this is not going to be applicable to those folks who have got a really fast broadband, but quite often I will use this when I'm out and about. And obviously last year, when we spent 6 months on the road, I didn't have access to that second external hard drive. And so what I was doing was I was making sure that at regular intervals I was going into a coffee shop which had a reasonable upload speed and trying to get as many of my photos backed up as possible. Now, obviously, for anyone who is using Photoshop, you know that once you start to put files into Photoshop, and especially you start to do layers, then you end up with files that are actually quite large. So if I just navigate down into my Lightroom Active Library and bring this up, then a little tip that what I quite often will do is, if I go into 2020 and sort these via size, you can see that there's a bunch of files here which are obviously larger than the typical 50 megabyte raw file. So if I was to go into the backup here and look at uploading, sorry, if I hit uploading here, if I hit play again, so if I look at which ones are waiting to be uploaded, you can see that there's at least one PSD file there, and there's a bunch of PSD files down here as well. I don't think anything in that folder is uploading at the moment. Now, I if I'm on a limited broadband connection, or I've got limited time, I kind of play the odds here. What I would quite often do is I would take the PSD files and the TIFF files, these large files, and I actually have another folder on my desktop called TIFFs. And so you see here that I've already got a folder structure in here. So what I would do in this case is I would find the files that it's trying to upload, and I would take those TIFFs and copy them over here. So they're not going to be backed up at that point in time, but rather than spending the whole hour backing up one 2.5 gig or 2.15 gig file, I would rather make the use of my time backing up all of these raw files, or how many raw files and JPEGs that need it backed up. So again, that's not going to be applicable if you've got a good upload, or you're not limited with time. Just let it go ahead and do the backup. But Amazon Prime photos, really useful. It comes included as part of Amazon Prime. Why wouldn't you use it? So yeah. Still awake? Hope I didn't bore you too much. So that's my own personal way of doing kind of backups, and nothing really groundbreaking there. Just thought I'd kind of show you some of the programs that I use. And certainly maybe you're watching this and you're kind of thinking, hang on, I've got Prime membership. I didn't realize that Prime also came with unlimited photo storage. That's probably the big eye-opener and the big thing that I've changed with my backup strategy over the last probably 18 months or so. So there you go. So basically it's a backup using Time Machine, archiving on 2 hard drives, one of which normally resides in another location, and then on top of all of that, as and when I get onto a good Wi-Fi connection, Amazon Prime photos. And obviously if you've got a good home wireless network, there you go, you've got access to keep a copy off-site with Amazon Prime. I'm going to go and make myself another coffee, and then I'm hoping
to get out with a camera later on today. We'll see how that works out. Right, until next time, take care. Bye-bye.